John Hook's Newsmaker starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker. Later in the program, I will be joined by an ex-Green Beret, Scott Mann, who is sounding the alarm about an October 7th style terrorist attack like we saw in Israel that he believes will happen within the United States. But first, the race for Maricopa County Recorder, which oversees early voting, voter registration, oversees public documents. We heard from Democrat Tim Stringham on this program with Ellen McNamara 3 weeks ago, but now I'm joined by Justin Heap, Republican running for Maricopa County Recorder. Good to see you. Thank you.
Hey,
appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay. You have talked about lack of confidence in voting in Arizona. What would you do specifically as recorder to try to change that?
Well, I think the voters have been very clear on what they expect to see from the recorder's office and the reasons they feel the lack of confidence. And what they expect to see is more efficient, more transparent processes, more security, and faster election results.
Now, you're obviously not running again in the State House, but that's been your current job. But you got your law degree.
That's correct.
And you've got a law office in Mesa?
That's correct.
Okay. So you're a little bit about your background so that people know a little bit about you.
Oh, well, sure. So like I said, I'm a civil liberties attorney. I have a firm in Mesa. I ran for the legislature in 2022. Mostly I was very concerned with what I felt was the government's overreach on COVID and a lot of what was pushed down on people. And so I decided, hey, it was time to get involved. I ran for politics. I was elected to represent LD 10. That's East Mesa and part of Apache Junction.
Okay. People losing confidence in the system. Why do you think that is? What has been the crystallizing moment where people say this thing is just not working? Well, if they believe that.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that this didn't come out of the blue. This has been a feeling among our voters for quite a long time. We've now had 3 successive incumbent recorders that have lost, and all essentially for the same reasons. Because we have had the same systemic problems. We've had voter disenfranchisement, we've had long lines, failures in our voting systems, and unreasonably long delays in getting out our results. And then on top of that, of course, we seem to have breakdowns in a lot of the security protocols that we would expect on any secure election, which raises serious questions for the voter.
How much time have you spent down there in Maricopa County at the recorder's office at the election area to kind of go through how they do what they do?
Well, I don't spend a lot of time at the recorder's office, but I have spent the last 2 years in the legislature. And I serve on the House Elections Committee. So we have been working, I've spent essentially dedicated the last 2 years of my life to analyzing the complexities of both our process and our election laws in an effort to try to streamline our system, make it more transparent, more efficient, and address the concerns that the voters have that I don't feel have been addressed through the office. And so
You mentioned how we've had a turnover. Helen Purcell was there forever. Ran a lot of very clean elections. She got nailed on a presidential preference election that she didn't open enough voting centers. She was gone. Adrian Fontes comes in, much like you. He's a Democrat, though. He says, I got to clean this up. We're going to clean this up. He has problems. He gets bounced. He's now our Secretary of State, but he got replaced. Then you get Stephen Richer. Stephen Richer comes in, tries to do a good job. He gets into problems. You end up beating him in the primary. What I'm getting at is there is a learning curve in that office, and anybody who works in there says, this is a really tough job, and you got to have some institutional knowledge to run it.
So, well, the one thing I will say is that, look, I am the most experienced person who has run for this office in a decade. So Adrian Fontes, when he ran, had never held office. He'd never served in it. He'd never worked in elections. The same thing with Stephen Richer, who'd never held office or worked in elections. I have been working on this issue for the last 2 years, studying. So I think I come in with a pretty good groundwork. Now, I agree, there is a lot of institutional knowledge at the office, and there is a steep learning curve, but I think that we actually have mechanisms in Arizona law to address most of the concerns that voters have. We just have not effectively implemented them. And
One of the things you've talked about that is interesting, and you hear some people talk about this in certain corners, you want to return to a precinct-based model that you think, I'm putting words in your mouth, you can explain it, that all of this mail-in voting, the proliferation of mail-in voting, is causing, in your view, problems. You'd like to shrink that down.
Well, there's a distinction between what precinct voting is and the mail-in voting. So precinct voting, that's up to the Board of Supervisors. I do advocate, I'm happy to work with the board and encourage them to do that. Until 2018, we used to do precinct voting. So you would go into a local precinct in your area. It was a church, a school, about 1,000 to 1,500 voters. The ballots were pre-printed there. You would show ID, they'd hand you your ballot, and people were in and out pretty quick. In 2018, we moved to what we call the voting center model, where they said, we're going to concentrate all of these. You can go to any voting center, we'll print them out. Everything we have done since we left the precinct voting model has made voting slower, has caused more problems. At a precinct level, you don't have ballot machines going down, you don't have printer errors that are causing these slowdowns, and people are simply not happy with the system.
You think it's overcomplicated the process?
I think it's overcomplicated the process.
Okay.
Now, I think it's more difficult for elections officials. The reason why we went there is you have to staff 937 different precincts. It's certainly easier on the election officials to have more centralized, but it isn't easier on the voters. And so I'm willing to have us make that change and help to get those precinct staff so that we can go back to a smoother election.
Mail-in voting, you think it's become too wide? Too many people are getting ballots?
Mm-hmm. Well,
you understand that 80% of Arizonans vote that way.
Oh, of course.
They love the convenience. They
do.
love to be able, for instance, with the ballot this year, 2 pages, 4 pages really, because it's front and back.
Sure.
They love to be able to put it on their counter and look it over and look stuff up on the internet and go over candidates. That's tough to do going into a precinct.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, typically until very recently, it was Democrats who were sounding the alarm on the concerns with universal mail-in ballots. Jimmy Carter has written very persuasively why that's one of the least secure ways that we can do voting. So I think
his argument was that anytime you separate a voter from their ballot, when they mail it in, that you open up a door for potential problems.
Exactly right. And if Jimmy Carter and I can agree, we're on different parts of the spectrum, that we have issues, I think it's a good policy to encourage as many people to vote in person as we can. However, I'm not running for the legislature, I'm running for the recorder's office. The recorder does not, that's whether we restrict, expand, or what we do.
That's not your call.
That's a question for the legislature. I will follow the law that we have.
Would you advocate for that down at the legislature to try to limit mail-in voting?
Well, I have advocated. So this year, for example, I moved a bill through the legislature that would maintain our mail-in voting, allow everyone, but simply ask people to re-up and request every year before they receive that mail-in ballot, so that we can clean up the problem that we've had with our active early voting roll.
One of the big issues that's come up in this campaign, everybody asks you the same question. Do you believe that the 2020 election, the 2022 election were on the up and up? Do you?
Well, I don't think ultimately it's important what I think about the election. The question is what do the voters? And I think that question really doesn't actually address any of the real concerns. So I don't claim that I know elections were stolen. I don't run on election fraud. But it is clear that our voters, a huge percentage of our voters, and it's not just Republican voters.
So how would you fix that?
I am just as concerned that Democrats.
How would you fix that? With these concerns people have, what would you specifically do to try to fix that?
Sure. Well, what we need, first of all, is we need more transparency at the office, and we need to show people that we are following the law. So I don't make the claim that I think elections were stolen because I'm an attorney. I don't make statements I can't prove. But what we can prove is that laws have not been followed, that we've been lax on a lot of our security provisions, and that we haven't listened to the voters. Actually, the voters, there's wide agreement between Democrats, Republicans on what they'd like to see. So once we get past that.
If there is fraud, let's say, if there is, do you believe it would come from the mail-in vote, or do you doubt machines?
Well, the machines aren't really under the recorder's purview. I don't.
That's
really
right. The supervisors oversee
I don't
that.
really have any say or position on the machines.
I guess I'm getting at what your quarrel may be.
Yeah. Again, my goal is not to try to identify fraud. My goal is to make the system as secure and fraud-proof as possible so that everyone, Democrats, Independents, Republicans, everybody can feel confidence in our vote. Because I think the biggest threat facing our republic is not the potential for voter fraud, it's the lack of confidence. When our voters do not feel confident, they don't turn up, they don't vote. I'll treat every ballot the same. This is a partisan election, but it's a very nonpartisan office.
Let me ask you about signature verification.
Okay.
You have questions about it, that it's too loose. Do you think people can get through that system, dumbing up a signature?
I don't know if they, I mean, that's not really a possible question to answer. I do have concerns that we are not accurately checking the signatures when they come through the system. So it's possible that someone may, simply not follow a matching signature, and because of the rush and press, especially at the end when we have a lot of late earlies, that we're rushing the process. We don't have enough oversight to make sure that's being verified.
Final thing, Justin, and we appreciate you coming on. For people out there making up their mind, why are you the right person for this job?
Well, like I said, I have spent the last 2 years of my life looking at Arizona's election processes and trying to figure out ways to make the process more efficient, more secure, and more transparent. And I am a constitutional conservative. I believe that every Arizonan has a God-given right to feel confident in their ballot. And whether they are a Democrat, Republican, or an independent, their vote should be treated exactly the same, should be treated with reverence. That is the people's voice. And so my goal in the office is to make sure that everyone, Democrats, it doesn't make me happy as a Republican to know that 40+% of Democrats also express concerns about the election. I want them to feel confident. I want everyone to know that I'm an impartial observer and I'm just running an efficient system.
Okay, Justin Heap.
Thank you, John.
Republican candidate for Maricopa County Recorder. And as you know, we heard from Tim Stringham 3 weeks ago on this same program. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
When we come back on Newsmaker, an ex-Green Beret who is predicting that the attack on Israel a year ago will happen here in the U.S. It's just a matter of time. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann joins me next on Newsmaker. Welcome back on Newsmaker. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann is a Green Beret. He served this country for 22 years, deployed across the world, notably in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's also a New York Times best-selling author of Operation Pineapple Express, about the mission to rescue Afghans after the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan from the U.S. He's also written a play called Last Out and has a new book, Nobody is Coming to Save You. I'm going to put it up here. I won't give you the cut line on the bottom, but if you can squint, you can read it. A Green Beret's Guide to Getting Big Blank Done. Scott Mann joins me on Newsmaker. Scott, it's an honor, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
Scott, I first heard you on Sean Ryan's podcast, and you were talking about, you know this area well, you were talking about what you believe is an imminent threat and high probability of a terrorist attack on the homeland committed by ISIS, ISIS-K, Al-Qaeda, name it, that you think is going to happen. Tell me why you so strongly believe that.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. And it's not just me. This is the thing that I think is so prolific about this is for 20 years, the nation trusted guys like me, Green Berets, Navy SEALs, CIA operatives, to basically get a good ground intelligence picture after 9/11 and to build a partner force that could stand against these groups. Well, guess what? We did that, and then we abandoned them in that withdrawal, and we never hung up the phone, even though the government did. So we're still talking to these intel operatives. We're still talking to these commandos. We're still talking to the resistance, and they don't trust the three-letter agencies of our government. And what they're telling us is that there is an active plot underway that's going to make 9/11 look like a dress rehearsal. And this is coming across multiple sources that are highly vetted and tons of veracity.
Are you guys alerting the three-letter agencies to the threat? Because it sounds like you've got better intel in Afghanistan because you guys were in the middle of it and you made contacts, deep contacts, that you're more plugged in than our agencies are.
Our government willingly walked away from 98% of its ground intelligence capability when we abandoned Afghanistan. 98%. Now, that was really what put us in the bind that allowed 9/11 to happen. So we have talked about this to the administration, and there are people within these volunteer groups who have informed the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies. And what I will tell you is that very little, if anything, has been done with it. Some of our veterans are reluctant to even give any more information because when they have given it, sources on the inside have been killed. And let's not forget, John, that the U.S. government right now is paying $80 million a week to the Taliban.
That just shocked me. Absolutely shocked me.
Yeah. So there's a lot of reluctance in the veteran community right now to even share this information. Although we are doing it, we're trying to put it out any way that we can. What's being done with it is very little.
Scott, it's been 23 years since 9/11 happened. Boy, I'll tell you, in America, our memories are short. That rocked us to our core, yet I feel like somehow for a lot of people, that's in the rear view. There's a whole generation that wasn't even around when that happened. And you're talking about an attack that would much more resemble what happened in Israel on October 7th than what happened on 9/11. Can you explain?
Yeah, remember that a lot of these intelligence professionals who have since left the agencies, to include William Archer, a British intelligence professional, they never hung up the phone on these Afghan allies, and they've managed to repurpose a lot of these intelligence operatives and special operators from Afghanistan into very highly placed positions within Al-Qaeda, ISIS-K, and the Taliban. And what we've learned from independent reporting and the Afghan resistance is that what you saw on October 7, what you saw in the Russian theater with distributed attacks where we live, work, and play that are horrific in nature, with small arms, grenades, rocket-propelled grenades, that's the kind of attack we can expect here on the homeland. There are as many as 1,000 operatives in the United States, according to the Transatlantic Intelligence Council. And it would look something like an October 7 style attack, but across 6 to 10 cities at one time. We think about what the DC snipers did out of the back of a car. Imagine 1,000 operatives across 10 cities, or an October 7 style
what
attack.
You're describing would literally paralyze the country. People would be in such fear to go anywhere. That's really worrisome. And this is the kind of thing we talked about after 9/11. Why buildings? Why the Pentagon? Why the Capitol when there's all these soft targets?
100%. And don't forget, too, that the son of Osama bin Laden, Hamza bin Laden, who we thought was killed in Ghazni province under the Trump administration, is now the de facto leader of Al-Qaeda.
That's confirmed, correct? He's alive?
That's confirmed. He's alive. Confirmed by multiple sources. And he's on record now as calling for attacks against the United States and the West to bring the battlefield of Afghanistan back to the West. And he has a mandate to do it. And most of the intelligence professionals that I'm talking to who are actually paying attention to this are saying that this thing is so far advanced that you're not going to stop it. The best you can do is hope to get the word out and mitigate it.
Wow, unbelievable. Okay, Scott, for the doubters, and I'm kind of one of them because I want to live in a bubble like most Americans that, this just can't happen. But you're starting to penetrate my bubble, I got to be honest. Why hasn't it happened in 23 years? What are they waiting for?
Well, this was a plot that was really hatched somewhere around 2006. Osama bin Laden himself was orchestrating it, and they've learned a lot since 9/11, and they've learned that the smaller, more distributed attacks where we live, work, and play have a much more horrific effect. They're much more efficient. And what, if you want to see a model of what this looks like, look at the attack in Mumbai, where I think it was 10 attackers hit 10 targets over 3 days and caused something like 170 fatalities. They held terrain. They were able to seize multiple targets in a very complex fashion. So it just makes all the sense in the world. Now, you bring the open borders that we've had for the last 3 years. Why would you conduct an attack as long as the borders are open? Continue to bring bad actors across the border for as long as you can. Get everything in place as best as you can, and then operate. One more thing that I'll say about this: it cost roughly $500,000 to do 9/11 with 19 hijackers. Imagine a couple $100 million that the State Department has already admitted it accidentally gave to Al-Qaeda, a couple $100 million and 1,000 operatives. What does that look like?
So
you don't have to be an analyst to make sense of that.
In our naivete, which when I start to listen to your stuff and read your books, the incompetence at the high levels is really stunning. I mean, and we see this in all kinds of areas of life. The people in a certain position of authority, you seem to, you grant them that, oh, they must know something more than me, more than I. And you find out that a lot of these people are dopes. They're not very good.
Right. Hence the title of my book, Nobody's Coming to Save You. If we're waiting for institutional leaders to come riding over the hill on a white horse and save the day in any capacity, we're deluded. I mean, it's community leadership that has always gotten big stuff done, and it's what we're going to need here. But one other thing I'll say on this, John, and I do hope people will pick up a copy of Nobody's Coming, but there's another book that people should take a look at and make up their own mind. But it's called Al-Qaeda 2.0, and it's written by William Archer. It just came out.
Yep.
Give it a read. It's a very quick read, and make up your own mind. But for God's sake, do your own research. Don't just listen to institutional leaders who systematically abandoned a 20-year ally. I mean, that alone should give us pause for anything they tell us.
Scott, what do you make of this attack, that was planned by this Afghan citizen and a juvenile accomplice in Oklahoma City? They were plotting an election day attack using AK-47s apparently to spray voters with gunfire. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? That sounds more like the lone wolf rather than a concerted, controlled plot of evildoers, to quote George Bush.
So a couple things there. One is we don't know yet exactly the details of this. More will be coming out on that. Kudos to the FBI for disrupting this. I think the term lone wolf these days really ought to go out the window, because an attacker that is inspired online is still an attacker, and they can do great damage. And frankly, that's how these groups are operating now. They have media companies that are as good as any media company in the United States, and they are inspiring and directing people through the internet. So these attacks are not lone wolf attacks.
Okay, something else that came out of these discussions that you had with Sean Ryan. We left so much gear in Afghanistan. They're using our bases to train. That's what I'm gathering. And we left equipment there, including passport creation machinery. Are these guys able to create legal documents to enter the country, not across the border, but to fly into our airports?
We not only left that, we left biometrics and all of the databases for all of the commandos and everybody else that's in our system. So all of our allies can now be methodically hunted down with biometric machines. Anybody that's coming over here that's a potential operative, they can actually run through the biometric database to make sure they don't pop on it. And here's one more. The minister of Siraj Haqqani, right, is the minister that allows all transportation and travel to happen out of Afghanistan, the Minister of Interior. He is the father of suicide bombing. He has a $10 million bounty on his head, and he's the guy that grants legitimate passports. They don't need U.S. equipment. They can print legitimate passports, and Siraj Haqqani, one of the most wanted men in Afghanistan, is the Minister of Interior. He runs the passport office. So he can send people over here legitimately with legit passports.
That is frightening. The book, your new book, is called Nobody's Coming to Save You. Scott, I really appreciate it. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann. And again, thank you for your service. I hope it's a wake-up call for some people to at least consider that there's still a threat out there. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Scott, great to see you.
The threat
really
of our
appreciate
time.
it.
Thank you.
We're back in a minute on Newsmaker. Thanks as always for joining us, and we will see you next week on Newsmaker.